Hey guys, tonight we take a step back in time, through the cobblestone streets and into the warmth of a medieval tavern. Imagine the scene. The flicker of candlelight dances across the walls as the clinking sound of mugs filled with ale fills the air. The tavern is buzzing with the low hum of voices, the scent of roasted meat, and the unmistakable aroma of fermented drink wafting through the thick smoke. You can almost feel the heat from the fire as it crackles in the hearth, providing the only real source of warmth on a chilly medieval night. It's here, in these humble, dimly lit rooms, that much of the real social life of the medieval world unfolded. But before you get too comfortable, remember, this was not a place for the faint of heart. Life in medieval times was hard, and the tavern was a space where, for just a few hours, people could forget their troubles, but only at the risk of facing all the chaos that could come with it. In medieval society, the tavern wasn't just a place to grab a drink. It was the beating heart of social interaction. As you wander through the bustling streets of the town, you can almost hear the sounds of laughter and conversation spilling from the tavern's open door. People from all walks of life would gather in these places: farmers, traders, lords, and peasants, all enjoying a brief respite from their daily struggles. Taverns were more than just watering holes. They were a vital part of the community. Places where news was shared, business was transacted, and even politics could be discussed, albeit in hushed tones to avoid the ear of the king's men. Taverns were the lifeblood of medieval society, offering both warmth and companionship on a cold winter's night, and often serving as a community's primary form of entertainment. The walls of these establishments were like the ears of the town, listening to everything: whispers of gossip, new deals being made, and tales from faraway lands. Historians still argue whether the tavern's role in political discourse was understated or whether it was a covert hotbed of rebellion in certain parts of the medieval world. Either way, you can feel the pulse of the community every time someone steps inside, their voices joining the low murmurs and the occasional burst of laughter. As you step further into the tavern, you notice the low, heavy beams of wood that form the ceiling, giving the room an intimate, almost oppressive feel. The air is thick with the combined scent of beer, roasting meat, and the faint, lingering traces of smoke from the hearth. The fire crackles in the corner, casting dancing shadows that seem to stretch long across the floor. The floor itself is rough. Uneven cobblestones, worn down by years of muddy boots and the occasional spill of ale. Here, the inhabitants of this medieval world come to unwind, to seek camaraderie, or perhaps to lose themselves in their drinks for a while. The atmosphere is undeniably rustic, yet in this simplicity, there's a sort of magic, an energy that binds the people together. At the bar, a few sturdy wooden mugs clink together as they are filled with frothy ale, dark, golden, or sometimes a lighter, more bitter brew depending on the tavern's preferences. Beer was the drink of choice for most people, easy to make and cheap, especially considering the lack of refrigeration or preservation techniques. It's not the refined beer we know today, but rather a thick, earthy concoction that can put a weight on your stomach and leave your senses buzzing. The medieval recipe for brewing beer wasn't perfected, but it was sufficient, a necessary element in daily life, and certainly central to the tavern's social dynamic. Historians still debate when exactly brewing beer in medieval Europe became a more refined practice, with some arguing it was more of an accident than a craft passed down through generations. The origins are shrouded in mystery. Some even suggest that it may have been brought to Europe through the trade routes, while others believe it was an innovation born from the local climate and the need to preserve grains through fermentation. However it started, it's clear that beer was more than just a drink. It was part of the very fabric of medieval life. You lean over the bar to get a better look at the people around you, and you notice how the tavern's patrons are clustered in groups. There's no real privacy here, only the open faces of those who've come together. Perhaps for business, but more likely for something a little more relaxing. The women, though often fewer in number, sit with men, holding their own, as they sip their ale or enjoy a piece of bread. Peasants and craftsmen tend to sit together, while the wealthier folk enjoy a more secluded corner, away from the bustle of the lower classes. The distinct separation of social classes within the tavern gives you a sense of the rigid hierarchy of medieval society. Historians still argue whether this separation was as rigid as it appears in the modern interpretation, or if these social divides were somewhat more fluid in the tavern setting. It's easy to imagine that class would have been a more glaringly obvious feature of everyday life in medieval towns. But one could also imagine that, after enough drinks, the lines between peasants and lords might blur, if only for a few hours, where the laws of rank were momentarily suspended. As the night deepens, the tavern begins to fill with more laughter, slurred speech, and the occasional outburst of a drunken argument. A few men stumble in from the street, their faces red from the cold, eager to join the merriment. They are greeted by the loud chatter of the room, and some make their way to a nearby table, where a fresh mug of ale is soon handed to them. The air is thick with the hum of voices. But despite the rowdy atmosphere, a certain ritualistic calm remains. This is the place where secrets are shared, where alliances are made, and where the weight of the outside world is momentarily forgotten. As you watch the scene unfold, your attention drifts to a group of men seated near the hearth, discussing what sounds like the latest news from the local lord. The talk is serious. No laughter here, just the business of the day. Medieval taverns often served as the meeting places for those who carried the weight of local affairs. It wasn't just about drinking, it was about networking, making deals, and ensuring the stability of one's social standing. The tavern, in its own way, became a microcosm of medieval society, a place for both leisure and labor, where politics could unfold just as easily as the best tales of drunken mischief. But amidst all the chatter and noise, there's a sense of quiet in the air, a sense of familiarity between the patrons. The same faces come back night after night. Taverns were where people found their rhythm in life. For some, it was their only outlet to escape the harshness of the daily grind, while for others, it was simply a place to gather and engage in friendly competition, whether in drinking games or in verbal sparring over the day's events. These spaces were more than just a place for sustenance. They were social hubs that kept the pulse of medieval life alive. Historians still argue whether the tavern's role as a social institution was fully recognized, or if it was simply a necessary aspect of communal life that evolved naturally. Was it an intentional institution that served the community's needs, or was it merely a product of circumstance, shaped by necessity and the lack of other forms of entertainment? Whatever the case, it's clear that the medieval tavern was central to the development of communal life, especially among the working and lower classes, where the tavern became an integral part of how people connected with one another. At a table near the center of the room, a game of dice unfolds. You can hear the rattling of the bones as they tumble across the worn wooden table, the occasional cheer or groan depending on the outcome. This is another staple of the tavern, a form of entertainment that came in many shapes: dice, Cards and drinking games were the pastimes of the time, offering a rare form of enjoyment that transcended social status. Anyone could join in, and everyone could feel the thrill of a lucky roll or a well-placed bet. Of course, for some, these games could go on long into the night, sometimes even resulting in debt or strained relationships. The tavern was a place where fortunes could be won, lost, or, more often than not, spent with the evening. Historians still debate whether gambling in the tavern was considered an accepted part of social life, or if it was viewed more negatively by the church. The church, with its strict laws and regulations, would often frown upon such behavior, viewing it as a moral failing. However, some scholars argue that gambling wasn't seen in such a harsh light, and it may have been tolerated in some areas as part of the broader social fabric. It's easy to imagine that in a world where survival was a daily struggle, a little bit of risk and chance might have been seen as a welcome distraction from the harsh realities of medieval life. The hours stretch on, and the flickering candlelight casts long shadows across the wooden walls of the tavern. A low murmur rises and falls in rhythm with the crackling fire. Outside, the wind howls, and you can hear the occasional horse's hooves echoing in the distance as the cold night sets in. But inside, it's warm, a cozy little universe, with everyone finding their place, whether sitting by the hearth, leaning over a table, or lounging in the dark corners, nursing a drink or engaging in quiet conversation. The night isn't just a time to drink, it's a time to share stories, to bond with others, to strengthen the ties of community. You notice a group of women sitting together in a secluded corner, laughing quietly over their mugs. Some of them are familiar faces, servants who work in the tavern. Others are local women who frequent this place. Medieval taverns were places where everyone, from the lowest peasants to the wealthy merchant class, could mix. The women at this table are part of that world too, though they hold a different role in the tavern's ecosystem. While men often came for business or to unwind, women, especially those who were part of the tavern's staff, came for entirely different reasons. They could be seen not just as workers, but as integral players in this social environment, offering conversation, companionship, and, occasionally, something more. You also spot a young man at the bar, eyeing a woman who seems to be from a higher station than him. His eyes, though shy, flicker with hope, but he knows the boundaries that exist between the two of them. In the medieval world, taverns served as more than just a space for communal drinking. They were places where class distinctions could become less rigid. Still, the lines of status were never completely erased, and the flirtations, whispered conversations, and glances exchanged carried their own unspoken weight. As you sit back, the music from the small band in the corner fades in and out, drawing attention from the conversation, as well as providing a backdrop for the unfolding drama. Lute strings and drums echo in the air as a dancer moves across the tavern floor, her body swaying gracefully to the music. It's a common sight in some places, a form of entertainment that serves to heighten the festive mood. Music, dance, and song were all part of the tavern culture, creating a sense of joy amidst the often grim realities of medieval life. For the peasants, this may have been one of the few chances to relax and enjoy life outside the chores of the day. Historians still debate the role of entertainment in the medieval tavern. Whether it was merely a pastime or if it held more profound cultural significance. Was it a reflection of the communal spirit of medieval society, a way for people to forget their troubles for a moment? Or was it just a distraction, offering fleeting enjoyment in a harsh world for the most part. The medieval tavern provided an outlet for people to forget the burdens of the day, to indulge in a moment of pleasure. And with that indulgence came the risk of excess, a risk that was often indulged in by all classes. Alcohol and entertainment flowed hand in hand, often leaving behind consequences, whether social, physical, or moral. You can almost taste the ale in the air, feel the thrum of the music in your chest. These are the moments, fleeting and often unremarkable, that make up the fabric of medieval life. The tavern was the heartbeat of society, pulsing with laughter, conversation, music, and yes, a little bit of mischief. But for all the fun and frivolity, it was a place where power, politics, and survival were still at play. The lines between entertainment and necessity, pleasure and work, were often blurred, each tavern-goer coming for different reasons, but all seeking something that was just as elusive: community. As the fire continues to crackle in the hearth, casting a warm orange glow over the wooden beams of the tavern, you observe a scene unfolding before you. The tavern keeper, a stocky man with a well-worn face and a thick salt and pepper beard, is busy tending to a barrel of ale at the back of the room. His movements are practiced, and he seems to have a rhythm in his work, a rhythm that matches the pulse of the place itself. A few coins exchange hands, and the drinks are served promptly, one mug after another, each one brimming with amber liquid that promises to warm the soul, if only for a moment. The smell of roasting meat wafts through the air, mingling with the scent of burning wood and ale. A servant brings over a large platter of food, distributing it among the customers with practiced ease. The food is simple but hearty: stew, bread, and small cuts of meat, enough to sustain a weary traveler or a laborer who has spent the day working the fields. In medieval times, the tavern was not only a place for drinking, it was often a central part of the social and economic life of the town. People gathered not only to indulge in drink, but also to refuel, to socialize, and to discuss the affairs of the day. The drinkers are no longer just talking about the weather or the crops. They've begun discussing matters of import, local politics, trade routes, and the happenings of the surrounding countryside. You catch snippets of conversation about the latest harvest, a rumor about a noble visiting the town, and even gossip about a recent scuffle between two rival families. It's a mix of the mundane and the important, issues that impact the daily lives of everyone present. But as you listen more intently, something shifts in the atmosphere. A group of men, clearly from a different social standing, enters the tavern. They are dressed in fine tunics of rich indigo and russet, their cloaks bearing the insignia of their family or station. The entire room seems to quiet as they enter, their presence instantly commanding respect. They take a seat near the fire, and the conversation begins to change, becoming more respectful and formal, as though these men's words carry more weight. These noblemen are here not just for the beer, but for a purpose. The tavern was often used as a place for informal negotiations, where alliances were made and favors exchanged. For the nobility, taverns served as a convenient meeting spot where they could discuss matters away from the eyes of the court, where they could discuss business without the formality of the great halls. Even so, there's always an air of caution when the elite enter a public space, a reminder that the tavern, despite its relative freedom, is still subject to the intricate web of politics that governs the land. As you watch them, you begin to realize just how much the tavern functions as a social equalizer. It's a place where peasants, merchants, and nobles can all mingle. Even if only for a short while. There's a certain tension in the air as the lower-class patrons watch the nobility with a mixture of respect, fear, and admiration. The tavern keeper, as always, serves them without batting an eye. This is his world, where social rank is both fluid and rigid in its own way. But you can tell that beneath the surface, there are unspoken rules. The people know their place, and they act accordingly. Historians still argue whether medieval taverns were truly egalitarian spaces, or whether they simply masked the ever-present class divides. Some suggest that taverns allowed the lower classes to rub elbows with the nobility in a way that was rare in other spaces, fostering a sense of shared community. Others argue that the divisions of rank were more pronounced than ever in these public spaces, with the lower classes only allowed to interact with the nobility in specific, often superficial ways. The fact remains, however, that the tavern was a place where class distinctions were both reinforced and momentarily suspended, a place where power dynamics played out through conversation, drink, and even the unspoken gestures that marked one's station. But just as the noblemen begin to engage in quiet conversation among themselves, the door swings open again, and a burst of cold air sweeps through the room. A group of travelers enters, looking worn from the road, their cloaks dusted with snow, and their faces haggard from days of travel. The tavern keeper nods at them with a knowing look. He's seen it before. Travelers who need rest, food, and a warm drink. He gestures them toward a table by the fire, where they'll be able to find solace from the cold and weariness of their journey. As the night draws on, the tavern continues to fill, becoming more lively and bustling. The hum of conversation, the clinking of mugs, and the laughter of both the young and old fill the air. The fire crackles in the hearth, providing light and warmth, while the moon outside continues its silent watch over the town. The tavern is, for all its simple pleasures and occasional tensions, a place of community, of connection, and of survival. It is the beating heart of medieval life, where people come together to share not just a drink, but their lives, their stories, and their hopes for the future. The merrymaking continues as the hours slip by, and the noise of the tavern grows more animated. In the far corner of the room, a small group of musicians has begun to play, a lute, a drum, and a wooden flute, creating an upbeat and jovial melody that adds to the festive mood. The music is simple, but heartfelt, the kind of music that can be easily understood, no matter your social standing. The melody fills the room, encouraging even the most stoic patrons to tap their feet and sway in rhythm. The musicians, dressed in plain tunics, sit on a low platform, their faces illuminated by the flickering firelight. They are, after all, a part of the entertainment that the tavern provides. Their presence just as much a part of the tavern's atmosphere as the food and drink. But as the music plays on, you notice a shift in the atmosphere. The door swings open again, and this time, it's a lone figure who enters. A woman, her face veiled by a heavy scarf, steps inside. She's alone, which is unusual in a place like this. The room momentarily quiets as the patrons take notice of her entrance. She carries herself with a quiet confidence, though there's a subtle weariness to her movements. She walks past the tables, her eyes scanning the room, until she reaches the counter where the tavern keeper waits. The tavern keeper nods at her, a silent recognition passing between them. before he offers her a seat by the fire. She settles down, removes her veil, and you see that she is older than most women who frequent the tavern. Her face is lined with age, but there's a quiet dignity in her eyes. As she sits there, the rest of the tavern seems to relax again, though there's an air of curiosity about her. A few of the younger men exchange glances, and you can feel a sense of intrigue in the air. This woman, though she looks like she might belong to a higher class, has taken her seat among the common folk. There's a story here, one that isn't immediately apparent but can be felt in the way she moves, in the way she interacts with the world around her. Historians still argue about the role of women in medieval taverns. Some suggest that women who were not serving food or drink were often seen as out of place, especially if they were of noble birth, while others believe that taverns were not quite as rigidly gendered as one might think. Women did frequent taverns, though their presence was sometimes viewed with suspicion. Were they simply seeking the same companionship? Or were they there to engage in something more illicit? The tavern was a place where social norms often collided, where women could occupy a space of freedom and potential danger all at once. As the night continues, you notice the tavern becoming more intimate. The fire flickers, the music slows, and the conversation grows more personal. The woman, now seated comfortably by the fire, exchanges a few quiet words with the tavern keeper. Her face softens, and you sense that she is at ease. For the first time in a long while, the patrons, no longer so preoccupied with their own conversations, glance toward her occasionally, as though waiting for her to speak or to act. You wonder who she is, what her life might have been like before she entered this humble tavern. Is she a widow, a merchant, or perhaps someone who has just been passing through the town? Her presence has sparked curiosity among the regulars, and the conversations around the room seem to shift subtly. But what's even more intriguing is the way she has become a part of this tapestry of medieval life. A place where everyone, no matter their background, is woven together for just a few hours in the soft glow of the firelight. The hours stretch on, and as the night deepens, the patrons begin to settle into a quieter rhythm. The fire crackles, the musicians pack up their instruments, and the clinking of mugs begins to slow. You can feel the comfort of the familiar. This is what the tavern was meant to be, a place of rest, of release, and of respite from the harsh realities of life outside its walls. For just this brief time, all the world's troubles seem a little farther away. Historians still argue about the role of the tavern as a space of both refuge and danger. Was it a place of camaraderie, of shared experiences, where all were welcome to find solace? Or was it more a reflection of the complicated power dynamics of medieval society? Some scholars suggest that taverns were places where class distinctions were softened, where anyone could find respite from their struggles, while others believe that they merely perpetuated the rigid hierarchies of the time, offering only a temporary escape from a world bound by rules and expectations. But as you sit there, feeling the warmth of the fire and hearing the soft murmur of voices, you can't help but feel that the tavern, in its simplest form, is more than just a place of commerce. It is a place where people can come together, if only for a brief moment, and share something human, a drink, a story, a laugh, or even a quiet space to rest. As the evening unfolds, you find yourself lost in the hum of voices and the clinking of mugs. The tavern's energy is a strange mix of relaxation and anticipation, like everyone is waiting for something, though they're not quite sure what. The woman, who had earlier taken a seat near the fire, remains quiet, her eyes fixed on the flames as if lost in her own thoughts. You can almost sense a kind of sadness about her, but it's hard to pinpoint. Perhaps it's the way she withdraws from the rest of the crowd, or the way she seems to carefully avoid any direct eye contact with the others. As you continue to observe, you notice the tavern's regular patrons growing more animated. A few of the men have started telling exaggerated stories of their latest exploits. Their voices louder now, full of bravado. Their words flow easily, punctuated with laughter and the occasional slap on the back. It's clear that the alcohol is beginning to take its effect, loosening the social bonds and encouraging a kind of carefree camaraderie that can only come with a few too many drinks. The warmth from the fire contrasts with the coldness of the outside world, and you realize how vital places like this were to the medieval townsfolk. The tavern was more than just a place for food and drink. It was a refuge, a space where life's harshest realities could be momentarily forgotten. In a world filled with uncertainty, poverty, and danger, this place provided a sense of stability, a moment of human connection that was often in short supply elsewhere. You also realize that the tavern wasn't just a neutral space. It was a center of power, even if it was a subtle one. Here, social dynamics played out in real time, and status could shift with every interaction. The local lord's son might sit at the same table as the lowliest peasant, and for a few fleeting hours, their roles were erased, leaving only the shared experience of food, drink, and stories. The social hierarchies outside the tavern's doors didn't matter within these walls. Here, all were equal under the roof, as long as they had a drink in hand. Historians still argue whether the tavern played a greater role in reinforcing or subverting the social order. Some suggest that the tavern was a place where the undercurrents of rebellion and dissatisfaction could be felt, where common folk might discuss their grievances and frustrations without fear of retribution. Others believe that the tavern was simply another space, where the rich and powerful could maintain control over the lives of the poor, ensuring that any subversive ideas stayed just that, ideas, and nothing more. But whatever the tavern's true role in society, it's clear that, for those who spent their nights here, it was a vital part of their world. For the common folk, the tavern was a place to share news, make deals, and socialize. For the lords and ladies, it was a more casual venue, where they could let down their guard and engage with the lower classes in a more relaxed setting. And for all, it was a space that facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and stories, whether that meant a pint of ale or a whispered secret. The woman by the fire has now joined in the conversation, her voice soft and measured, adding a few words to the general chatter. It's clear that she has experience in the ways of the tavern, and while she doesn't speak much, she commands respect in her quiet way. There's a certain elegance to her demeanor, a sense of restraint that stands out in the otherwise boisterous atmosphere. You can't help but wonder what brings her here, in this moment, among these people. A few minutes later, another figure enters the tavern. This time, it's a man, a young one, perhaps no older than 25. He's dressed in a simple tunic, but there's something about his posture, the way he moves, that suggests he's not just another patron. He scans the room briefly, his eyes settling on the woman by the fire. Without a word, he makes his way toward her, his steps deliberate. The conversation around them continues as though nothing unusual's happening. But you can feel the shift in the air. The woman looks up as he approaches, her expression unreadable. The young man stops in front of her, offering a slight bow. She responds with a nod, her lips barely moving. There's an exchange of quiet words between them, but the details are too soft for you to catch. The rest of the tavern seems to momentarily hold its breath, as though waiting for some dramatic revelation. Instead, the woman rises from her seat, her cloak sweeping behind her. The man offers his arm, and together, they leave the fire and step toward the back of the room. The patrons resume their conversations, but there's a sense of anticipation left in the air, a feeling that something has shifted, though no one knows quite what. Historians still debate the role of relationships and courtship in medieval society. Was marriage truly about love, as some might romanticize it today? Or was it more about practicality, about building alliances and securing family fortunes? Some suggest that medieval courtship was far less about personal choice and far more about familial duty, while others argue that even in such a rigid society, the spark of romance was alive, albeit hidden beneath layers of social expectation and religious doctrine. As the evening wears on, the sounds of laughter and conversation fade into a more intimate rhythm. The young couple, now lost in their own world, move to a quieter corner of the tavern. The fire crackles, the candles flicker, and the music begins to slow, the steady beat of the drum fading into the background as the night draws deeper. You sit back, listening to the hum of the tavern, and realize that for all the noise, all the distractions, there's a certain peace here, a peace born from the shared human experience of food, drink, and companionship. The evening continues to unfold around you like a tapestry, with the once lively conversations now becoming quieter and more intimate. In this moment, the tavern feels like an island of warmth and camaraderie in the vast, cold expanse of the medieval world. Outside, the chill of the night presses against the thick stone walls. But here, inside, there's a sense of security, a shared understanding that for a few hours, the cares of the world can be put aside. The woman and the man, still in the corner of the tavern, seem to be engaged in a conversation that has taken on a more serious tone. She listens intently, her expression focused, while the man gestures with his hands as he speaks, his voice low but insistent. The air around them seems to crackle with a mix of tension and something else, perhaps desire, perhaps something even more complicated. You can sense that this conversation isn't just about casual pleasantries. It's about something deeper, something unspoken. There's an edge to it, a sense of hidden meaning, as though the very words they exchange are weighed with significance. Historians still debate the role of courtship in medieval times. Was it always as formal as it seems? Or were there moments of rebellion, of passion that broke through the rigidity of societal expectations? Some believe that courtship was an elaborate dance, filled with rules and expectations that governed every move. Others suggest that while the formalities existed, there was still room for genuine feeling, for affection that defied the boundaries of social class or status. Meanwhile, the rest of the tavern continues in its own rhythm. A group of older men sit at a table in the corner, nursing their drinks, their faces creased with the weight of years. They talk about the harvest, about the state of the town, about the latest gossip. The sounds of their voices mix with the occasional clink of a tankard or the rustling of a nearby broom as the tavern's workers prepare for the end of the night. The tavern, in its own way, acts as a mirror of medieval society, its conversations, its noise, its warmth, all reflect the larger world outside. Here, social class is temporarily blurred. The poor and the rich, the young and the old, all sit side by side, sharing in the simple pleasures of food, drink, and company. Yet, you can still feel the underlying tension, the unspoken rules that govern everything. In the back of your mind, you can almost hear the voice of the church, reminding everyone of the sanctity of marriage, of the importance of sexual propriety, of the dangers of excess. As the night deepens, the man and the woman finally rise from their seat. There's no dramatic farewell, no sweeping gesture, just a quiet exchange of looks, a subtle nod, and they are gone. Their departure goes unnoticed by most of the tavern's patrons, who are too busy with their own conversations or lost in the haze of their own alcohol-induced reverie. But for you, it feels like something significant has just slipped away, like the final thread of an old, familiar story. Historians often point to the role of taverns as places where the social order could both be reinforced and subtly subverted. In these spaces, people were free to express themselves in ways that would have been impossible in other settings. The drinking, the sharing of stories, and the occasional flirtation were all part of a delicate balance. At times, these social exchanges were simply a way to pass the time. At others, they were more meaningful, as people sought connections in a world that often seemed indifferent to their struggles. You find yourself thinking about the woman and the man, about their quiet conversation and the moments that passed between them. What were they talking about? What had they shared in that brief interaction? Was it love? Or something else entirely? And what happens next? The answer is likely lost to time. But in the quiet of this tavern, it's as if you can almost feel their story unfolding, piece by piece. As you sit back, you notice the quieting of the tavern. The lights are dimming. The fire is beginning to burn lower, and the sounds of laughter and chatter have given way to a softer, more subdued atmosphere. It's almost time for everyone to go home, to return to their respective lives, where the rules of society will once again take center stage. But for now, this space exists in a kind of suspended reality, where all are equal under the roof, where the weight of the world can be momentarily forgotten. Historians still debate whether taverns in medieval times were merely a place of escape, or whether they served as a kind of microcosm of medieval society, reflecting both its rigid structures and its occasional cracks. Were they simply places to drink and unwind? Or did they represent something deeper, an opportunity for people to connect, to challenge societal norms, or to express desires that could not be voiced elsewhere? As you prepare to leave, the sounds of the tavern still echo in your ears. The flickering candles, the warmth of the fire, and the lingering taste of the medieval world are all around you. For a brief moment, you feel connected to this distant past, to a time when life was shaped by the simple acts of drinking, talking, and sharing with others. You step outside, the cool night air hitting your face, and as you look back at the tavern's glow, you realize that the stories told within those walls will continue to resonate for centuries to come. You step outside the tavern, the cool night air embracing you like an old friend. The streets of the medieval town are quieter now, save for the occasional murmur of voices or the distant clip-clop of hooves against cobblestone. The warm glow of the tavern's windows seems to fade behind you as you wander further into the darkness. But the weight of the evening's atmosphere lingers. The flickering street lanterns cast long, wavering shadows on the ground, giving the whole town an air of mystery and quiet contemplation. As you walk, you notice that even the quiet streets seem to tell a story. The houses you pass by are simple, made of wood and stone, their windows dark except for the occasional glimmer of light. The town itself is bustling by day, full of energy and life. But at night, it takes on a different character. A place where people retreat into the safety of their homes, where the noise of the market gives way to the hushed whispers of secrets shared only behind closed doors. In the distance, you can hear the low rumble of a bell, signaling the approach of curfew. The medieval day is officially over, and everyone must return to their homes. But even as the streets empty, you know that the world of the tavern still pulses within the town's walls, in the hearts and minds of those who live here. You think back to the conversations you overheard, to the laughter, the flirting, and the sense of fleeting freedom. For a few hours, the weight of medieval social structure seemed to dissipate, replaced by something more primal, more connected. Medieval taverns, as you now realize, were more than just places to drink. They were places of community, of ritual, and of subtle rebellion. In a world where social structures were rigid, where everyone knew their place, the tavern offered an escape, a space where the rules of the outside world didn't quite apply. And yet, even here, in the seemingly carefree atmosphere, the weight of societal expectations could never be fully shaken off. In the medieval world, nothing was ever entirely free from the eyes of the church or the watchful gaze of the law. Historians still debate the extent to which taverns represented a space of rebellion or a space of comfort in medieval society. Were they truly places where people could express themselves freely? Or were they just a reflection of the larger, more controlled world around them? Some suggest that taverns were simply a form of release from the pressures of medieval life, a place where people could let their guard down and experience temporary freedom. Others argue that they served a more subtle function, reinforcing societal norms, even as they allowed for small transgressions. As you make your way down the dimly lit streets, you begin to feel the coolness of the night settling in. The warmth of the tavern is now a distant memory, replaced by the crisp air and the quiet hum of the town at night. But in the back of your mind, the stories of the evening still play out. The voices of the patrons, the clinking of tankards, and the lingering sense of connection. For all the complexity of medieval life, you realize that the tavern, with its simple pleasures and its social intricacies, was a place where people sought solace and connection, a place where the strictures of society could be briefly loosened. You pause for a moment and take in the sight of the town around you. The streets are empty now, save for a few stray figures making their way home. There's something peaceful about the quiet, something that invites reflection. You think about the women and men of the tavern, about their lives, their struggles, and their quiet acts of rebellion. You think about the men and women who worked in the tavern, how their labor, both physical and emotional, helped to create the space that allowed for the exchange of stories, for the sharing of secrets, and for the breaking of social boundaries. Taverns in the medieval world were complex places, full of contradictions. They were both safe havens and places of tension. They were where people came together, but they were also spaces where the rules of society were both challenged and reinforced. They were sites of socialization, but they were also deeply tied to the economy, religion, and the legal framework of the medieval world. Historians still argue whether taverns were simply places to relax and drink, or whether they served a more profound purpose in medieval society. Were they places of rebellion, where people could escape the pressures of their lives? Or were they just another part of the tightly controlled world of medieval towns? Some argue that taverns were, in fact, a crucial part of the social structure, while others see them as a form of escape, a space where medieval people could experience a fleeting sense of freedom before returning to the constraints of their lives. As the sound of the bell fades into the distance, you continue your walk, the quiet of the medieval town enveloping you. The night is peaceful, but your thoughts are filled with the stories of the tavern and the people you've just witnessed. You know that the tavern's doors will open again tomorrow, and another chapter of medieval life will unfold, full of the same complexities and contradictions. But for now, all is still, and you can't help but feel a sense of awe at the lives that unfolded within those walls, in a time long past. As you continue your journey through the medieval town, the images of the tavern and its inhabitants linger in your mind, like the faint aftertaste of the evening's drink. You begin to notice the contrasts in the town around you, the way the warmth of the tavern seemed to offer an escape from the chill of the night. But beyond the comforts of the tavern, the reality of life in medieval times was much harsher. People still had to face the realities of the world, work, disease, and social structure every single day. You turn a corner and find yourself at the edge of the town, where the streets give way to farmland. The landscape here is quiet and open, the fields stretching out under the moonlight like a dark sea of crops. It's peaceful, almost serene. But you know that these fields are where much of the labor in the medieval world took place. Farmers, peasants, and laborers worked the land from sunrise to sunset, cultivating grain, vegetables, and livestock that would feed not only themselves, but also the entire town. As you walk further, you can almost hear the sounds of the workers, though they're not around anymore. Their presence lingers in the air, a part of the town's rhythm. The work in these fields wasn't easy. Medieval farmers worked with rudimentary tools, wooden plows, sickles, and axes. There was no advanced technology, no modern farming techniques. Everything was done by hand, and the success of the harvest was largely dependent on the weather and the seasons. For these people, survival wasn't just about hard work, it was a constant struggle against the forces of nature. Historians still debate how much of medieval farming was shaped by the weather versus human ingenuity. Some suggest that the farmers of the time were incredibly resilient, figuring out ways to adapt to the harsh conditions of medieval life. Others argue that much of medieval farming was governed by forces outside human control, with weather patterns, disease, and pests playing a far larger role than the farmer's ability to adapt. As you make your way through the farmlands, you can't help but think about how different life must have been for those who worked here. The tavern may have provided a temporary escape, but the real work of life happened out here, in the fields. The men and women who worked these lands were the backbone of medieval society, even if they were often invisible to the higher classes. Suddenly, you feel a shift in the air, a cooling breeze that stirs the fields and the quiet town around you. It's a reminder that nature is always present, always in control, no matter how much humans try to assert their will over it. The farmers worked tirelessly to harness the land, but nature had the final say in the end. As you stand there, contemplating the relationship between humans and nature in medieval society, you start to wonder how much of the town's daily rhythm was truly influenced by the land itself. How much did the harvests, the weather, and the seasons shape the very structure of life? You think about the tavern once again, the way it served as a place of escape, but also as a place where people gathered to celebrate the harvest, to drink, and to share stories. It was a place of connection, but also a reflection of the larger forces at work in medieval society. Historians still argue whether medieval taverns were primarily a reflection of human culture or a product of the natural world. Some believe that taverns were created out of necessity, places for people to gather and drink after a hard day's work. Others suggest that taverns were tied to deeper cultural beliefs, reflecting the importance of social interaction and communal activities in a world that often felt disconnected from nature. It seems that in the medieval world, taverns were not just places to drink. They were places to be human, to engage with the rhythms of life, and to find comfort in the face of a harsh and unpredictable world. The breeze grows stronger as you stand there, the rustling of the crops in the fields, a reminder that, in the end, nature will always have the final say. You know that the cycle of life will continue, the harvests will come, the taverns will open again, and the rhythms of medieval life will continue on. The people of this town, both in the tavern and in the fields, are part of a larger story, one that stretches through time and across the land, a story of survival, struggle, and resilience. As the night stretches on, you find yourself once again walking through the town, now quieter than before. The laughter from the tavern has dimmed, and the sounds of horses' hooves and the occasional creak of a cart fade into the distance. The streets, though still lit by the soft glow of lanterns, feel emptier now, more somber. The rich smells of roasting meat and freshly baked bread linger in the air, but are slowly overtaken by the more earthy smells of the town's nighttime routines. The smell of the nearby stables, the faint musk of animals, and the cool scent of stone and wood. As you wander deeper into the heart of the town, you approach a large, impressive building, its dark stone walls rising into the sky. This is the castle or manor house, the seat of local power. It's a stark contrast to the modest homes and taverns you've passed by. The building seems cold, imposing, and yet it also holds an air of mystery. Behind these walls, decisions are made that will affect everyone in the town. The nobility rules, and their lives are governed by different concerns and different customs. This is where the social hierarchy in medieval times becomes apparent. The noble classes enjoyed privileges that were unimaginable to the peasants and lower classes. The castle's occupants lived in relative luxury compared to the laborers in the fields. They dined on meats, fine wines, and delicacies, while the common folk made do with what they could harvest or trade. While peasants worked tirelessly in the fields, the nobility spent their days managing land, making political alliances, and, in many cases, pursuing their own pleasures. The role of marriage in the noble classes was markedly different from that of peasants. For the wealthy, marriage was not just about love or even the production of heirs. It was a strategic tool. Marriages were arranged to strengthen political alliances, secure land and wealth, and consolidate power. The social contract of marriage was thus far more political than personal. A nobleman might marry for love, but even that love was often tempered by the need for alliances. Historians still argue whether the primary role of marriage among the nobility was political or personal. Some scholars suggest that love played a significant role in noble marriages. but most agree that political considerations were always at the forefront. The connection between marriage and power was inescapable for the nobility. Marriage wasn't just a personal union, it was a political one, often calculated to maintain or expand a family's influence and wealth. As you stand outside the castle, you can't help but wonder what it must have been like for the people who lived inside. What were their concerns? What did their lives look like? Were they ever aware of the struggles of the peasants who worked the land for them? It's hard to imagine, especially when the castle seems so far removed from the daily struggles of the people in the streets below. But this is the way of medieval life. The nobility's wealth and status were inextricably tied to the labor of those beneath them. Without the peasants working the land, there would be no food to sustain the noble classes. Without the hard work of those in the fields, the castles would be empty, their walls silent. It's a delicate balance, one that relies on the cooperation, or perhaps the coercion, of those at the bottom of the social hierarchy. As you leave the castle behind and make your way back toward the bustling town square, the contrast between the rich and the poor is ever more apparent. In some ways, this separation is natural. After all, the nobility had the resources to maintain a lavish lifestyle. But in other ways, it's a reminder of the fundamental inequality that shaped medieval society. While the nobility enjoyed their privileges, the common folk endured hardships, all in the name of survival. Historians still argue about the nature of class and power in medieval society. Some argue that the feudal system was an efficient way of managing resources, with each class fulfilling a specific role. Others contend that it was an unjust system that perpetuated inequality and oppression. Regardless of how one views the feudal system, it's clear that the social structure of medieval society was deeply ingrained in every aspect of life, from the way people married to the way they worked. Everything was tied to their place in the hierarchy. As the night deepens, the sounds of the town gradually fade, and you realize that medieval life, for all its hardship, also had its moments of quiet beauty. The flickering light of the lanterns, the soft murmur of voices, the rhythmic clink of tools at the forge, all these elements make up the fabric of the town. But behind it all, the harsh realities of medieval society are always present, shaping the lives of the people who inhabit it. As you continue your journey through the darkened streets, you approach the heart of the town. Its marketplace now closed, but still rich with the lingering smells of spices, meats, and ale. The cobblestone streets are quiet, with only the occasional flicker of a lantern offering a semblance of light. Here, there's a quiet sense of something older, a deeper rhythm of life, one that has been shaped by generations and traditions that date back far beyond your own time. You catch sight of an old woman sitting near a small, flickering fire. She wears a simple woolen cloak, its edges frayed and worn from years of use. Her face is lined with age, but her eyes, sharp and keen, seem to notice everything. She's sitting by a small stall, where a few dried herbs hang in bundles. It's a common sight in medieval towns, those who live on the fringes of society, offering their wares and services to those in need. Her stall is humble but important. She sells medicinal herbs, potions, and remedies to those who cannot afford a physician's care. The ancient knowledge of plants and their healing properties was passed down through generations, often from mother to daughter. And it was one of the few areas where women could hold a certain degree of power and influence. In a world where men held most of the political and economic power, women like this one played a crucial role in ensuring the health and well-being of their communities. Medieval medicine was a blend of practical knowledge, trial and error, and superstition. Physicians, many of whom had received only basic training, relied on a mixture of herbal remedies, bloodletting, and religious rituals to cure the ailments that plagued their patients. While there were some advancements in medicine during the medieval period, many of the treatments used were rudimentary by modern standards. This old woman's knowledge of herbs would have been invaluable in the time before modern medicine. She might have been called upon to treat fevers, infections, or wounds that would have otherwise gone untreated. While her remedies may not have been entirely effective, they were often the best option available. The reliance on herbal medicine was so strong that even the clergy would sometimes turn to it when faced with illness. Historians still argue about the efficacy of medieval medicine. Some suggest that the reliance on herbs and natural remedies was effective for certain ailments, while others argue that the practices were largely ineffective and sometimes harmful. Regardless, it's clear that these folk healers played an important role in medieval society, and their knowledge was respected, even if it was often shrouded in mysticism. As you move away from the old woman's stall, you notice the sounds of a different type of activity emerging from further down the street. A group of men gathered around a fire, talking in low voices. The flickering glow of the flames casts long shadows, and you realize that they're engaged in a conversation that's as old as time itself, the politics of the town. These men, perhaps the town's leaders or local landowners, are discussing matters that affect the daily lives of the townspeople. Their conversation is serious, punctuated by gestures and looks of concern. They speak of the harvest, the coming of winter, and the management of resources. The tone is one of decision-making, as they weigh the needs of the community against the realities of the land they occupy. You realize that this is the true heart of the town's governance, a small group of men who make decisions based on what they believe is best for the community. While their discussions may seem mundane, they have the power to change the lives of everyone in the town. Their decisions will affect the way resources are distributed, how the town deals with its challenges, and even how justice is administered. As you listen, you can't help but wonder how much these leaders are influenced by their own interests, how much of their power is derived from their land, their wealth, and their social standing. Medieval society was built on a system of hierarchy and loyalty, where those with land and power controlled the flow of resources. In a sense, these leaders are not just making decisions for the good of the community. They are safeguarding their own positions, ensuring that their status remains intact. Historians still debate the nature of medieval politics. Some argue that power was largely decentralized, with local leaders having significant autonomy over their towns and villages. Others believe that medieval society was far more hierarchical, with the monarch and the church holding the most power. Regardless, it's clear that the politics of the time were shaped by a complex web of relationships, loyalties, and obligations. As the men continue their discussion, you step back into the shadows, feeling the weight of their words and the gravity of their decisions. The medieval world was one of constant negotiation, where power was both held and contested, and where every decision had the potential to ripple out and affect the lives of countless others. The night grows deeper as you move through the streets, passing a narrow alley that leads to an area where the more unsavory elements of the town gather. Here, the atmosphere shifts again, less refined, more raw. The air is thicker, heavier, and the noise around you rises with an edge of chaos. The flickering lanterns cast long, wavering shadows against the rough stone walls of nearby buildings. The sounds of laughter, shouting, and clinking coins fill the space. blending into a discordant symphony of medieval life. You find yourself in a world of taverns, the heart of entertainment for the medieval townsfolk. Taverns were much more than just places to drink. They were social hubs, essential to the fabric of everyday life. These were the spots where locals would gather after a long day of work, where news was shared, deals were struck, and, of course, alcohol flowed freely. For peasants, taverns were a refuge from the brutalities of daily life. They offered warmth, camaraderie, and a brief escape from the grind of survival. In these taverns, drinking was far from a casual activity. It was a ritual. You can almost feel the warmth of the fire in the hearth. Hear the crackle of the wood as it burns. The tavern's interior is dimly lit, with rough-hewn tables and benches scattered throughout. The air is thick with the mingling scents of wood smoke, spilled ale, and the hearty stews being cooked in large cauldrons. People are gathered in small clusters, talking, laughing, arguing, and sometimes singing. In this space, the boundaries between social classes blur for a moment. Everyone from peasants to merchants to wandering knights may share a drink and a conversation. As you observe, you notice that there's something else happening in these places: the exchange of gossip. Medieval society was tightly knit, and information spread quickly, often through these informal gatherings. Secrets, rumors, and local politics found their way into the ears of those who frequented the taverns. For many, this was one of the few ways to learn about the world beyond their immediate surroundings. But what really stands out is the drink itself. Ale was the beverage of choice, brewed locally and consumed by the gallon. Water, in many medieval towns, was not always safe to drink. There were concerns about contamination, and water sources could be unreliable. But ale, brewed to varying degrees of strength, was a safer option, both refreshing and providing a little social lubrication. In fact, tavern owners often played an important role in the local economy. Their ales were frequently the topic of much debate. Who brewed the best? Who had the strongest? And who could drink the most? Historians still debate the role of alcohol in medieval society. Was it simply a practical necessity, a safer alternative to water? Or was it tied to deeper cultural and social practices? Some suggest that the ubiquity of alcohol helped create a sense of community and solidarity among the townspeople, while others argue that alcohol's role was as a tool for control, used by the nobility to keep the peasantry subdued and manageable. As you wander through the tavern, you catch snippets of conversation, of laughter, and a hint of something darker beneath the surface. There's always a sense of tension here. Alcohol may have served as a social glue, but it also had the power to stir conflicts, inflame passions, and lead to violence. You catch a glimpse of a rowdy group at one table, their voices rising, clearly in the middle of a heated debate or perhaps a brewing altercation. The medieval tavern, like the society it mirrored, was never a place of pure merriment. It was a space where the complex interplay of politics, power, and personal relationships came together. You can imagine the precariousness of such a place. While it offered a momentary escape from the harshness of life, it was also a microcosm of the larger medieval world. The tensions that simmered beneath the surface of the town found their expression here, in the casual, often volatile interactions of common folk. It's easy to see how a single quarrel, sparked by a misunderstanding or a drunken outburst, could escalate into something much more serious. As you leave the tavern behind and continue your journey, the sounds of the revelry fade into the distance. but the image of that lively, unpredictable world stays with you. The medieval tavern, with all its noise and chaos, was a crucial part of the community, a place where the fabric of everyday life was constantly being woven. Unspoken rules of behavior and survival lived out in the form of songs, jokes, disputes, and the quiet exchange of secrets. You continue to walk through the moonlit streets, the cobblestones beneath your feet faintly illuminated by the pale glow of lanterns. The evening quiet is settling in, but the shadows still seem to stretch long and deep, as if the town itself is holding its breath. You pass a narrow alleyway, where the smell of roasting meat and baked bread mingles with the occasional waft of something less pleasant: sweat, stale alcohol, and the unmistakable scent of the stables nearby. The tavern you've just left was full of life. But now, in the silence, you realize there was something more going on in those taverns than just the exchange of gossip and ale. While the alehouses and inns were essential to everyday life, they were also places where people sometimes sought solace in ways not exactly approved of by the church or local laws. Prostitutes, often called courtesans in more polite terms, found their place within this world as well, often working in taverns, brothels, or even in the open, depending on the region. Though not openly discussed, prostitution was an undeniable part of medieval society, and much of it centered around the taverns. Here, in the darker corners of the medieval world, people sought comfort in the form of sexual escapism, whether for pleasure, necessity, or simply survival. As you stroll past these taverns, you imagine the women who worked these streets. They weren't all of the same social standing, but many came from the lower classes, often forced into this line of work due to poverty or circumstance. You can picture them, with their simple but striking attire, coarse gowns, bright scarves, and jewelry, marking their presence in the world. And despite the societal stigma, many were well known and even respected among the community, for their role was not only to provide sexual services, but often to offer a form of comfort, companionship, and entertainment in a world where life was rough. In the medieval period, sex work was, in some ways, treated as a necessary evil. Towns needed the brothels, and in larger cities, the idea of controlling the profession was seen as an important part of urban governance. The church, however, was keen on demonizing prostitution, linking it with sin and damnation. But the reality on the streets was far murkier. Many women found this work to be a means of survival, given the lack of other options, particularly if they were widows or unmarried. The stigma, however, still stuck to those who engaged in the trade. Public shaming and harsh punishments were frequent for those caught outside of the prescribed sexual norms. Historians still argue whether medieval societies were more accepting of prostitution than we tend to believe, or whether it was merely tolerated for economic and social reasons. Some scholars contend that, especially in urban areas, prostitution was an accepted part of daily life, one that was understood as a necessary function in order to satisfy the sexual demands of the population. Others argue that it was only the working class who truly had to resort to it, while the upper classes, hidden behind the walls of their estates, kept their indulgences much more secret. As you imagine these women working the streets, you can almost feel the tension in the air, the mixture of power and vulnerability, desire and shame. The medieval world was a place of complex social structures, and these women, though often marginalized, were playing an undeniable part in the social machinery. They were the invisible workers, often overlooked, but crucial to the fabric of medieval life. The way they navigated the complexities of their position in society, balancing the demand for their services with the ever-present risk of punishment, is something you can't help but respect. But not all was grim for them. In some ways, these women carved out their own sense of agency. Some, though few, even found ways to make a living outside the typical brothel system, working as courtesans for wealthy men who could afford to keep them as companions. These women, though still under societal scrutiny, enjoyed privileges that the average tavern worker could not. Whether as informal companions or more permanent fixtures in noble households, they wielded a kind of power, even if it was one built on the very social and economic system that oppressed them. As you reflect on this world of complexity and contradiction, it becomes clear that the medieval tavern scene wasn't just about pleasure and escape. It was also a world of survival and subtle power dynamics. The tavern, with its warmth and beer, was the heart of the community, but it also reflected the harsh realities of life. In these spaces, everything from politics to personal survival played out, with sex as both a commodity and a cultural phenomenon, finding its own important place in the mix. As you continue to walk through the town, you feel the weight of centuries of tradition shaping everything around you. The chatter from the taverns fades behind you, and the sounds of the bustling town give way to quiet. More contemplative reflections on the hidden layers of medieval life. You've heard the clink of mugs and the laughter of people. But you begin to realize that taverns were more than just places to drink. They were the beating heart of medieval society, where people came to forget the harshness of their lives, but also where the most important exchanges took place. Secrets were traded here, alliances were forged, and conflicts simmered under the surface. The impact of taverns in medieval life went far beyond their role as places of relaxation or indulgence. They were venues for the exchange of news, ideas, and gossip. In a world without modern communication, these humble taverns served as the unofficial centers of information. Word spread quickly through the rough-hewn wooden tables and the smoky rooms. People from all walks of life, peasants, merchants, travelers, would gather, sit together, and share the news of the day. These were places where politics and power were subtly negotiated, where deals were made over a mug of ale or a jug of wine, and where royal decrees were discussed in hushed tones. While the tavern was, at its heart, a space for social interaction, it was also deeply connected to the economic and political fabric of the medieval world. For the nobility, it was not uncommon for important matters of trade, land, and power to be discussed in the most public of settings. You might imagine a noble lord, seated in the corner of a bustling tavern, listening carefully to the exchange of rumors and opinions, gleaning valuable insight about the social currents that were shaping his domain. This was a time when the boundaries between the elite and the common folk weren't as sharply defined as they are today. In fact, the tavern offered a rare opportunity for the lower classes to interact with the nobility, in a way that was both casual and profound. Historians still debate the true role of the tavern in medieval life. Some argue that it was primarily a place of escape, a refuge from the monotony and difficulties of the medieval world, a place where people could temporarily forget the harshness of their daily struggles. Others suggest that taverns were more closely tied to the economic and political structures of the time, as they offered a space for important transactions and negotiations to take place. Some even argue that taverns were the true centers of medieval culture, where social norms were shaped and redefined. As you wander deeper into the heart of the town, you pass by yet another tavern, the sounds of merriment and the smell of roasting meat wafting from within fill the air. But you pause, taking a moment to reflect on the tavern's significance. It wasn't just the beer, the food, or the company that made these places so crucial to medieval society. It was the role they played in shaping the broader social and political structure of the time. The tavern was a place where people gathered not only for pleasure, but also for survival. In a world where life could be unpredictable, the tavern offered a sense of stability, a place where community bonds were strengthened, where the rules of society were both enforced and subtly bent. In this quiet moment, you realize that medieval taverns were places where much more than just alcohol was consumed. They were where ideas, traditions, and social contracts were passed from one person to the next, where power and influence quietly flowed through the wood-paneled walls. They were vital centers of human interaction and cultural exchange, spaces that helped define medieval life in ways both seen and unseen. And so, as you continue to move through the town, the shadows stretch long around you, and the faint sounds of the tavern's revelry fade into the distance. In this moment, you understand just how important these places were, not only for what happened within them, but for the quiet ways they shaped the lives and histories of those who walked through their doors. The tavern, in all its complexity, was as much a social institution as it was a place of indulgence. And as you slip further into the night, you can't help but think how much more there is to this world than meets the eye. Hidden in plain sight, in the shadows of the medieval taverns,